Okay, so here we are. We are going to actually start the tutorial now where we are going to be adding image assets, visual assets into this sample web page. And before we get into the work that we need to do in Illustrator and Photoshop to optimize our images, I wanted to review what the page looks like right now and tell you a little bit about how you are going to take your own HTML documents that should, at this point, have placeholder images in where you intend to have visual assets in the future. That's part of your workflow, right? Is that at this point, before learning about image optimization, we are not actually putting any of our own images or assets into the web page because they are not processed properly yet because you don't have that information yet on how to do it. So everybody's website should look something similar to this right now, where we essentially have some layout started. A lot of the content should be in here. So when I say content, I mean things like the language that we're going to be using. Remember, there's no placeholder text allowed for language for the text content in our websites, and you do have a requirement for a minimum amount of paragraph content. So this should look very similar to what your site, the state of your website is right now. So what we're going to be doing is in this gray area up here, which is the background of the header, there isn't actually a placeholder in there because I'm going to be adding a visual asset in here using CSS, which if you watched the last Monday's lesson on image optimization, and we talked a little bit about foreground images and background images, we are going to be adding in a background image using CSS to go behind this content. So there isn't actually a placeholder in here for me to refer to figure out how big that asset is going to need to be. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm actually just going to turn on my screen capture tool, which is Shift-Command-4 on a Mac, and I'm just going to use this as a way to measure the width. So when I look at this in here, I can see, oh, okay, that is actually 960 pixels wide. When I see the height of this unit in here, I'm going to snug it up a little bit closer to the top, I can see that the height of the unit right now is about 104 pixels. And I know that in the asset that I'm building, I'm going to want there to be a little bit of extra space in there at the top. So I'm going to build my graphic to be 960 pixels wide, and it's going to be about 200 pixels tall by the time I'm done with it. And so that's going to help give me some direction on what the scale is that I should be optimizing my image or visual asset for that particular region. Now down a little bit further, we can see that we do have traditional placeholder images in here, and the placeholder images are currently all set to being 200 pixels by 200 pixels. This is going to make it easy for me, so I'm going to know exactly how to crop my assets in Photoshop and then the exact size I need to save them out as through the Save for Web dialog box so that they will fit neatly in here. Okay, so now that we have actually seen what the sample starter page looks like, I'm going to pop it into code view for a moment so we can look at the back end of it. And what we're going to see in here is that, yes, this is an HTML document. I do not have the related files panel up here because my CSS is actually all here internally. So remember we talked about our 3 different CSS style sheet options in here. So what we have for this one is our everything in between the opening style tag and the closing style tag is actually the CSS content for this page. So when I look in here, right, here's the closing of the style, that means it's the closing of our CSS document or the CSS content inside of our document. Now a lot of the CSS that's in here already, you don't really need to worry about. It's just stuff that I have already pre-built to make this page functional for us to be able to work with it. And when we look down a little bit further, after we get through the CSS style sheet, and we close the head, then we open up the body, and then in here is where we are going to see the HTML code for it. So we can see that there's an H1 up at the top, inside of the header, and then as we move down through main, there's some information in here about processing images for use in your site. And please note that this web document is also an instructive document, so I have lesson material kind of built into the text content in here to give you some extra learning opportunities. So this is where we're going to be swapping out the placeholder assets and then putting in our own optimized assets. We're back and ready to start processing our images so that we can essentially optimize them for on-screen viewing. I am on the handout right now under the tutorial steps on step 2. So we're on page 2 of the handout if you're following along with that. And it says that we are going to process the header image to be a background asset. So again, this asset is going to come through and be placed into the background behind the header content using CSS. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I'm inside of my stock to site master, stock to site root, stock to site sources, which is where I'm beginning. So I have an asset in here that is considered to be a graphic, and it is an Illustrator file. Here's a preview of what the file looks like, and even though you can't tell in this view, this is the artboard behind it, and it's actually a transparent graphic. So the entirety of the graphic is this little scalloped edge with a small drop shadow, and then the white behind it is actually transparent. It's just previewing it with a white background. So if you're thinking about what type of a file this is going to be when it's optimized out, it's going to be a ping, right? Because it has transparency, and that's what ping is being used for in our class. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. When I double click on it, because it's an Illustrator file, it should open up directly into Illustrator, and you can see that the way that the file was actually built over here. So it's just a series of ovals that have been aligned with one another, and then I have used the appearance panel in here to give it a drop shadow, so we can see the drop shadow without and with. So we don't need to do any image processing in here, like we don't need to edit the file at all. What we're going to do instead is just go through the optimization process. So when we are in and we are ready to take a file out of Illustrator and move it into a Save for Web, we're going to go to File, Export, and then down to Save for Web, Legacy. Legacy really means that this is a tool or a process that Adobe is kind of saying is older technology. We also have export for screens and export as, but for right now we're going to stick with export for web legacy. When we pop into the Save for Web dialog box, it's going to start off for you looking like we just see one sample of our asset. I'd like for us to go into the 2-up so that now what we have on the left is the original file, and then on the right is the optimized version. So down here at the bottom I can see that this says header original banner, and it's 2.93 megabytes. And then over here it's telling me that the file is being translated as a ping 24, and that it's all down to 16.12 kilobytes. In this view, you can also see the checkerboard background, which tells me that those are transparent pixels in here. So that affirms again to me that this will actually be a ping file. Now over on the right hand side where we're going to be setting our optimization strategy, both here in Illustrator and also in Photoshop, what you're likely seeing right now is that this file has started off looking like it might be optimized out as a GIF file. We've talked about GIF and how GIF deals with transparency, and you can see in here how much of the areas that we want to show with variable transparency, so we can see that drop shadow, they are not rendering properly when they are being exported out as a GIF. So what we need to do is we're going to take this menu here, we're going to choose ping 24. Ping 8 is essentially the same as GIF, meaning that it cannot deal with alpha transparency across 3 channels. So this is one channel, which is 8. 8 times 3 channels is 24. So ping 24 is really the only option we ever want to choose if we're planning to work with a ping file. Now what I see in here as I move down is that I don't have a lot of options for how to optimize or reduce the file weight. The file weight is what I'm referring down here as 16.12 kilobytes. That's the file weight or the file size. The only way that I can actually deal with making the file less heavy is to deal with the sizing. And if you recall when I did my screen capture on my sample page, I noticed that the document or the width of my asset really is not going to be any larger than 960 pixels. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm checking to make sure that the link is locked, which it is, which is going to keep the width and the height connected to one another. So when I change this down to 960, and then I click on my screen over here, I'm going to see that my the dimensions for my height have also changed. So I've dropped about in half, half in terms of the width and half in terms of the height. And then this is a preview of the scale of that asset at its new size. And if you look down here at the bottom, you're going to see that the file weight has also changed. So we've dropped about in half there. That's about all we need to do here in Illustrator. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to save this out. Now, because I like to keep track of the dimensions of my assets, I'm going to go ahead and put that in here, 960 by 200 for the height. And I need to navigate back to where I want to store this. This file is now going to be stored in my root folder. If you're looking at a small window that looks like this and you are having a hard time navigating on a Mac, you can click on the little down-facing arrow and then we'll have our multiple columns, right? Because I'm in column view as opposed to being in icon view. So I'm going to go ahead and get myself back into where my site is stored. Let's see here. So here's my master. Sources is where I got the file from, but now I'm ready to move it into my root folder. I'm going to go into my assets. This is what I consider to be a graphic, and I'm going to go ahead and save this in here. Yes, I have already saved this in here, but yours will look like there's no file in there. Okay, so I'm done in Illustrator now. I'm going to go ahead and close out of Illustrator. I don't actually have to save anything about this file because I really didn't change anything about it out here in Illustrator. So I'm just going to say don't save. Okay, great. So I'm done with that one. And if I go back in my file browser and I look in my root folder, I can see assets, graphics, and then here is my ping file. It's roughly about 7 kilobytes, and it's been scaled down to the proper dimensions for my website. So we're not done though yet. We need to go back into our sources, and now what we're going to do is we're going to work on optimizing our assets through Photoshop. So that means that I'm down here on step number 3 in the tutorial steps, which says process the smaller images for main. So I'm going to go right into the images folder, and I have 3 assets in here right now. I'm going to select all 3 of them, and I'm going to take them and drop them into Photoshop. You can also open Photoshop and drag the assets there as well. You're going to see that they're all kind of opening up for me right now. And up here at the top, if you're unfamiliar with Photoshop, what you should see is 3 tabs up at the top for the different files that we are going to be optimizing out. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by following my steps in here. So I've opened up all of the images into Photoshop. Now I'm looking for the crop tool. So the crop tool is actually the 5th tool down in the toolbar on the left-hand side of Photoshop. And I'm going to select the crop tool. And then what it tells us is that we need to go up here to the options bar. The options bar is where we set the tool-specific settings. So what I want this to do is I'm going to click on my first drop-down menu, which normally is set to ratio, and I'd like to instead change that to width by height by resolution. So I'm going to click on the width by height by resolution, and what I want to do in here is I'm going to set these to be 200 px for pixels, and the other one is also going to be 200 px for pixels. If I don't put pixels in there, Photoshop is going to default to inches, and it's going to try to scale this up to 200 inches by 200 inches, which is essentially going to probably crash Photoshop for me. So leaving it at pixels, right, really making sure we have that in here, what I see on my screen is that I now have a crop box that is a perfect square. If I leave my crop box at this scale, what's going to happen is it's going to take all of this data, which is really actually pretty large in terms of pixel dimensions, and it's going to try to conform it or squish it all down into 200 pixels square. So I'm actually going to make this box just a little bit smaller. So I'm grabbing on any one of the handles and scaling it in towards the center. And I can move my image around in here and kind of get a composition that I am interested in sharing with my viewers. I'm going to scale it up or scale it down just a little bit more in here, and I'm going to move it around until I have a composition that I am interested in. So with my box in the location where I'd like to crop, I'm going to then either come up here and say, yes, this is what I'd like, or I can hit return or enter on my keyboard, or I can double click inside of the box. Any one of those is going to crop this asset for me. So after I've cropped it, you can see it becomes much smaller. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. On a Mac, that's Command plus. On a PC, it's likely Control plus. So here's my asset now. If I want to view it at 100% in here, I can go to the View menu and say, show me this at 100%. And it's saying that that's about the size that the image is going to look on my screen. That's actually untrue. To get an accurate idea about how large it's going to look on screen, you might want to try the 200%. This is actually a little bit more accurate. So this is about the size my thumbnail is going to be, or my image is going to be as it sits on the screen. All right, so I'm ready now to take it back through the File Save for Web dialog like we did in Illustrator. I'm going to go up to the File menu. I'm going to go down to Export, and then again we see over here Save for Web Legacy. When I come into Save for Web Legacy in Photoshop, the dialog looks just a little bit different. We have a couple of extra options in here. So one of the first things that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and put this into 4UP. And so 4UP is going to allow me to see the original, and then I can try different optimization strategies or settings on the right for each one of these individual tiles. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the top one. And what we can see right here is that this file and this optimization for this visual right here is that it's set to be ping 24. Now we should know at this point that ping 24 is not the right file optimization or file type for this particular image, because this image does not require any transparency. So ping 24 is 94.97 kilobytes with this image. I'm going to go ahead and pop down. I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to go down to the next one, and I'm going to start over at JPEG, because I've identified that JPEG is really the correct file type for this image. And I'm going to start off with my quality setting at absolute maximum. At a maximum, this file would be 49.9 kilobytes if I were to take it out in its current configuration with the settings that I have over here on the right. But I don't ever want to take just what I'm given initially. I'm going to step back in terms of the quality and try out a couple of other optimization settings and see if I can retain the same quality asset but get the file size down even lower. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here just to that 200% again, because this really is a more accurate scale for what it's going to look like when it's on the web. So I want to view it at that accurate scale. I also don't really want to be zoomed in so closely that I'm seeing it and I'm seeing optimization artifacts that I'm probably not going to see if I see this on the web, because my image is not going to be at this scale. So I'm trying to get the most accurate representation, and for me that's going to be about 200 pixel or 200%, excuse me. So I'm going to leave that here. Again, this is at the maximum JPEG quality. And I'm going to move over to the other one where, again, I can make sure that I'm working with the JPEG. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to go to very high. When I go to very high, I'm going to look at my image here and I'm going to compare it against the one that would be coming out at about double the file size. So for this one, when I took it down from maximum to very high, I dropped off half of the file size, which every saving really does count. So I'm going to keep this one right here and I'm going to take it from very high down to high. When I do that, I'm going to place my cursor over high and I'm going to look right at the image. When I'm ready to click, I'm going to keep my eyes focused on the image that I'm looking at to see if I can detect any small shifts in the quality. I didn't see anything. I'm going to try zooming in just so that we can take a look at the difference between the assets. And what I'm starting to see is maybe a teeny bit more of the JPEG artifacting going on in here, where I have more kind of like solid areas where the color seems a little bit more solid. I'm starting to see a little bit of kind of blocking happening. Let's go ahead and take a look at this at this zoom. So when I just move that down to medium quality, you're definitely able to see that there is noticeable JPEG blocking in here inside of my file. So I know I've probably gone a little bit too far, but let me look at it again at my 200%. When I look at it, the 200% really doesn't look a lot lower in terms of quality, and I've gone down in huge file size dips. So I was at 25, now I'm at 7.8. So what I'm going to do instead is take a peek over here at this number on the right for quality. Between medium and high, there's actually 30 points difference in here. So I can actually modify the values over here using my numbers if I'd like to, and I could take this and I could slide this compression down, maybe take it down to about 50. I'm going to zoom in again just so that we can look at this and see what's happening at the pixel level. So does it look excellent? No. Does it look better than it did a couple moments ago when we were down to 30 quality? Yes, it looks better than that. I'm going to go ahead and scoop this up just a little bit. You can see I'm kind of adding quality back into it, and I'm seeing how it's sort of shifting and changing the quality on the screen as I hover over the quality slider and move it back and forth along this the slider. Now here, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing that the quality is, definitely shifting at this zoom level. But if I were to take this in and look at it at my 200%, which is more accurate, I'm going to see that I'm really not seeing any noticeable changes, and I'm down to about 18 kilobytes. So I'm going to stick with that. I think that's a good, lowest possible file size. That's our balance. So I'm just going to check down here a little bit. My numbers for the image size are already set because I cropped them in Photoshop. So I am going to save this one out because I'm happy with the way that the file size that I've gotten it down to. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now the name of the file in here, because I downloaded it from an Unsplash site, has somebody else's content in it, which is fine, but I'm going to change this so that my naming convention makes more sense for my website. And I'm going to call this ceramic tiles, and I'm going to put in my 200x200. And then of course I am going to find the location for where this file needs to live inside of my file navigator. So inside of my Dropbox, I'm going to go into my work, get through, excuse me. Now again, this file is ready now to go into my root folder, so I'm going to go into my assets. This is something I would consider to be an image at this time. I've got a good file name up here, so I am going to hit save. If I wanted to move this into being my master working document, so not the original file, but the working file, then what I would want to do with this is do a file save as. So for this one, I'm just going to call this one ceramic tiles, and I'm going to keep it as a Photoshop document because that indicates to me that this is the working document that I'm going to be using. And I would take this again and I would put this into I'm going back into my master folder. This is something that would still say in my sources. It's not going to go into the root because it's a Photoshop document. It's a master working file. But I could store it in here in my images folder as a Photoshop file, and I'm going to say save. So now I have ceramictiles.psd. Let's take a look at that out here. Inside of my sources now I have in my images folder, I have the image in its original configuration right here, which is the one that I downloaded. That's my original image. And then I have the master working document version of that file here as a PSD. So I will go back into that one and make edits if I need to. And then I also, inside of my root folder now, have the corresponding image loaded up, and it is ready to go into my website.